Hello, my name is Richard Weber. I am the Unified Communications Specialist for Com Solutions Company. And in today's tech tip, we are going to talk about how to enable and telnet to a ShoreTel Voice Switch appliance. So first thing we're going to want to do is get onto the console of the ShoreTel headquarters server. We can do that either being, on the console or do an RDP session as I have here to the headquarters server in my demo kit. Once we're on the headquarters server, what I'm going to do is just show you logging into Shoreware Director so that I can point out how we can find out the IP address, which we're going to need in a later step, of the actual ShoreTel switch that we want to work on. So I'm going to go ahead there and log in. To the headquarters server. As usual, we start here in Quick Look. I'm going to navigate down into the location where the switch that I want to work on is located. And just right here in Quick Look, I'll get a view of my voice switches and what their actual IP addresses are. So in this case, we're going to work on this ShoreGear 90 switch, and its IP address is 10.99.0.16. So the next thing I'm going to need to do before I can actually go and telnet into that switch is enable telnet onto that switch. And in order to do that, we have to go out to the command prompt and run a command that is installed onto the ShoreTel server along with the Shoreware Director install. So that command itself is actually located in the Shoreline Communications folder. And we're going to navigate into the program files x86, and from there go into Shoreline Communications. And then one more level down is the Shoreware Server folder, and that's where the command we need to execute is located at. That command is ipb xctl. Okay. So with that command, I'm going to tell it to enable telnet by using the telnet on switch, and then I'm going to put the IP address of the ShoreTel switch that we want to enable telnet for. At which point, I'm going to hit the enter key. So what it's going to do now is it's actually going to ask me for a password in order to enable telnet onto that switch. Now, by default, that password is the word ShoreTel with a capital S and a capital T, similar to the way, ShoreTel spells their name. But if I wanted to, as an administrator, I could have changed those passwords. So just real quickly, I'll show you where in Shoreware Director you can go to reset those passwords if they might have been changed on you, or if you want to change them yourself. So under System Parameters, and then underneath there is Other. So on this Other tab, we have right here this ShoreTel Voice Switch, the admin password and the root password. This is where we would go to change those passwords. Typically, I just make them all equal the same. So we'll go back here now to our command prompt, and I'll put in the password and hit enter, and I'll just basically get told that telnet access is now enabled for that IP address, the switch at that IP address. At which point now I can launch PuTTY, which is just a free telnet program out on the internet. You can get that from putty.org. It's freeware. It's very, very commonly used program. So once I get into here, I'm going to enter the IP address of the switch that I want to connect to and make sure that I'm, of course, connecting with telnet. At which point I can say open, and I'm going to get this little prompt up here, and it can be a little misleading, but basically it's just asking me for the username, and then it's going to ask me for a password. So at this point, the username is anonymous, and we're still using the default password of ShoreTel. So I'm going to go ahead and just type in my username. It's going to then prompt me for my password, at which point I can type in ShoreTel with a capital S and a capital T. And there you go. I am now telnetted into my switch. As you can see, I have a menu options, a list of options here that I can select from showing the actual software version that's running on that switch to showing the actual system configuration of that switch. And this is where I can see the Ethernet MAC address of that switch, what IP address is assigned to it, its subnet mask, its default gateway, what server it's connecting to, as well as its boot method, DHCP, bootp, and if it's booting from the flash or from TFTP. So I can then, if I want, doing question mark just shows me the menu again, I can use 3 to actually get into a series of menu items where I can change the IP addresses. And the beauty of it is too, it will actually change the IP address but not apply it till you reboot. So you can use this method to change IP addresses of switches and then go power them down and move them maybe onto another location or a different port on a different VLAN or whatever you may need to do with that. So at this point, we're just going to use 0 to exit out of this menu. I'll do question mark and show you again, and then just one other thing I can show you is if this switch were a switch that had some trunks running through it. Now this is a ShoreGear 90, so any trunks running through it would be analog trunks. If it was a T1K, it could have a PRI or a T1 line connected into it. But there's a command called go to shell, and that actually takes me out of the ShoreGear menu and puts me into the VxWorks prompt of the system. And at this point, I can do a couple things. And, just real quick, one thing I know is ARP show. And what that does is just show me the ARP table for the device. I can also, if I want, change my trunk debugging levels so that I would actually see traffic on those trunks right here on the screen. So I can do trunk underscore debug underscore level. And by default, that level is 0. I'll select it as, I'll set it to 4. And if I had active calls going through her, I would start to see some of the information of those active calls as they went through this gateway. Of course, anytime we set a debug, we want to undo that setting when we're done troubleshooting. So I'm going to go ahead and undo that debug. We'll just set that back to 0. Okay, at which point I can hit exit. It's going to take me back to the menu, and I can go ahead and log out of the switch. Now, one thing I want to make sure I point out is if once I log out of that switch, if I go to telnet back into that switch, I'm going to actually get denied because telnet is not enabled to that switch anymore. So if I needed to get back into the switch, I have to once again enable telnet. And at this point, it's going to allow telnet to be accessed from this host machine that I run that command on. And there you go. I'm getting the login prompt. So, every time I exit out of here, I've got to go back and re-enable telnet because it does put it back into a disabled state once my telnet session has ended. So there you have it. Thank you for listening. And once again, my name is Richard Weber. I am the Unified Communication Specialist for Com Solutions Company. And be sure to check back here often for additional tech tips. Thank you.